As much as Leah would probably enjoy helping me teach class, I don't think that she would be as big of a help as she thinks she is. We left off in Deuteronomy chapter 32. That's where we're going to pick up this morning. We were reading the Song of Moses. This song was meant to function as a witness against the people for the time coming when God brought judgments on them because they disobeyed Him. And just to kind of recap what we talked about last time, the first 6 verses kind of just introduced the whole song. This idea of God as the rock and the father of His people. Verses 7 through 14 talk about all the blessings that God has given His people. The abundance, how He protected them, how He gave them the land, how once they get into the land, He gives them all this stuff. They suck honey from a rock. They eat the fat of lambs, rams, goats, wheat. They have the best wheat and the best wine, and all those blessings in verses 7 through 14. And then verses 15 through 18 talk about how Israel turns around and rejects God in their prosperity. They look at God and they say, they forget God, essentially, because they've grown fat. And they start rebelling against Him. They turn around, they sacrifice to the idols, they sacrifice to the demons who are not God, and forget the God who gave them birth. And so in verses 19 through 27, we have this judgment on Israel. God decides He's going to hide His face from them. Because they make Him jealous with a non-God, He turns around and makes them jealous with a non-people. The Gentile nations come and oppress them. We looked also at how that's quoted in the New Testament, and how God uses the inclusion of the Gentiles in the people to provoke them to jealousy in Romans chapter 10. And says, but at the very end of all of this judgment, He says that He didn't completely destroy all of the Israelites. Because there was a possibility that the outside nations, the pagan nations, who didn't really know God, that they might look at that situation and misinterpret it and say, we're the ones that conquered Israel. We're the ones that are triumphant in all of this. The Lord hasn't done this. And so God in verses 28 through 33 describes how these pagan nations, they lack understanding. If only they were wise, they could understand the fact that they could not defeat Israel unless their rock had forsaken them. The pagans have a rock too. The pagans have gods that they worship, but their rock is not like Israel's rock. Their gods are not like Israel's God. The whole reason that they had even won a victory against Israel was because, Israel's God had actually decided to hand them over. The nations are but a tool in the hands of God. That brings us now to verse 34, where God talks about the vindication of Israel and the nations. And I guess I'll just ask, are there any loose ends up through verse 33 we don't have tied up?
Well, just was thinking, as you were talking here, that oftentimes we think that when bad things happen to us in this life and we have tribulations and all of this, that God is not with us. He's not helping us. Mm-hmm. The fact is that through all of this, what was God's purpose? God's purpose was to save mankind, not just Israel, but also the Gentile nations as well, as many as who would be saved. That was His purpose. Of course, we can see that from hindsight. They weren't looking at it from hindsight back then.
Right.
But everything He mentions here that you talked about is all trying to set things up so that God can save as many people as He possibly can. And all this tribulation against Israel, again, you said if He had destroyed Israel entirely, then the Gentiles might not have learned their lesson. That was all done to save men, not just to destroy Israel.
Yes. God's plan wasn't just to save Israel. His plan was to save all nations. What was one of the things in the promise to Abraham? In you,
all nations be blessed.
Exactly. All the nations of the world will be blessed in you. Genesis 12 and verse 3. And so this is part of God's plan. Now, what about the nations that reject God? What about the nations that still say, well, no, our hand is triumphant? What's going to happen to them? Judgment. That brings us to verse 34. Is it not laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasuries? Vengeance is mine, and retribution. In due time their foot will slip, for the day of their calamity is near, and the impending things are hastening upon them. For the Lord will vindicate His people, and will have compassion on His servants. When He sees that their strength is gone, and there is none remaining, bond or free, and He will say, where are are their gods, the rock in which they sought refuge? Who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offering? Let them rise up and help you. Let them be your hiding place. See now that I am He, and there is no God besides me. It is I who put to death and give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver from my hand. Indeed, I lift up my hand to heaven and say, as I live forever, if I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold on justice, I will render vengeance on my adversaries, and I will repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword will eat flesh with the blood of the slain and the captives, from the long-haired leaders of the enemies. Rejoice, O nations, with His people. Let all the angels of God worship Him, for He will avenge the blood of His servants and will render vengeance on His adversaries, and He will atone for His land and for His people. Now, what is the promise that is made here? Vengeance is mine, I will repay. Mark.
I actually think there are perhaps two promises here, and there may be two parts to one promise, and that is, vengeance is mine against mine enemies, but deliverance is mine to give to my righteous.
Okay, good. Yeah, judgment of God is always two-sided, right? That there's always a judgment on the enemies, but there's also always a vindication of the righteous. You can't have one without the other.
As you were reading this, I was thinking about that poem, Footsteps in the Sand, and the guy says, at my times of deepest trouble, there were only one set of footprints in the sand, and God said, well, that was because I was carrying you. Mm-hmm. This is one of those cases where there's only one set of footprints in the sand because they push God away, and God's not walking with them.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of times these inspirational poems like that don't really... they don't really give you the whole picture. But the idea here, God will avenge them on their adversaries. Vengeance is mine. That's quoted a couple times in the New Testament, actually, in Romans 12 and verse 19, and in Hebrews 10 and verse 30. And in fact, Hebrews 10 also quotes, verse 36, the Lord will judge His people, or the Lord will vindicate His people. We talk about God judging people, but sometimes judging means that, He gives you a favorable verdict, doesn't it? Sometimes when God judges you, it means He's passed judgment, you're innocent, you're free to go. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it means you're not vindicated or justified, you're condemned instead. But that's the idea here. That's quoted in Hebrews 10:30 as well. The enemies of God's people are judged, and the Lord's people are vindicated. They are saved. They are justified. In verses 37 and 38, we have these rhetorical questions, and we learn that Israel's false gods, what have they done? That's right. They haven't done anything. They have done nothing at all. The pagan gods are... Well, and actually here in verses 38, it does say that the pagan gods ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offering. It's like, well, wait a second. Do we have mechanical statues that eat the meat and drink the blood and all that? No, that's not...
They burned it up on the altars.
Yeah, they did. They burned it up on the altars. There was a pagan belief that whenever you sacrifice to a pagan god, that you were feeding them, basically. And that they couldn't eat by themselves, so you had to give them these animals so that they could have something to eat, basically. And in return for feeding them, they're not going to smite you, is the basic idea. Now, the Bible says that, if I were hungry, I would tell you. Psalm 50, kind of criticizes that whole mentality and says, where God says, look, there's all these cattle, there's all these livestock, He says, and they're all mine. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you. He says, I just eat them myself. Done. Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of a weird idea, definitely. But it was typical of the pagan thought of that time. And that was, verse 38 kind of reflects that idea. You've fed them your sacrifices, and what did it get you? Well, nothing. Because, that rock that you sought refuge in wasn't really able to give you refuge. Really wasn't able to protect you. Mark?
Makes even less sense to me, though, how that going out and drowning your gods is going to bring blessings through the year, which is what the Hindus do every year.
Is that right?
You might get to see that when we go over there.
That's interesting.
They're festivals, and then they go out the next day and they drown them in ponds and stuff.
Oh, okay. Gail.
It's the same, then we go,
Yeah, I don't.
where do you get off saying your God is that powerful?
Yeah. I've already made my soapbox about that in a couple of recent sermons, but I really don't care for this idea that that says that God somehow needs our help. God doesn't need our help. Now, there is a kind of a little bit of a paradox here, because we are making a claim that our God came and was crucified, which is, if anything, like that was his choice. I know. What kind of a God does that? That's the initial reaction that people have to that. That's illogical. But you're right. That is his choice. It's not like God was powerless to stop it. He chose to put himself through that. And the same thing, as far as the gospel goes. God's word will be proclaimed whether you want to help or not. Whether you want to do something to help or not. God will accomplish his purpose. The choice you have is not whether or not you're going to accomplish God's purpose for him, but whether or not you're going to be a participant in that purpose in the first place. And when we get to Judgment Day, God is not going to have to thank anybody for their help. Or, God's not going to be telling anybody, boy, I was sure lucky to have a servant like you. That conversation's not going to take place. It's going to be the other way around. We were much more fortunate to have a God like him.
So you're saying I can't ever leave that song here?
I am not. I don't have a blacklist of hymns. Believe me, if I told you the pet peeves I had about hymns, we wouldn't be able to sing anything. But
I just take those words as poetic, and I always think Mordecai's statement to Esther about it's going to happen. Now, are you going to be the one to do it or not?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you want to take it that way, I'm not going to dispute about words on this point. I don't want to step on anybody's favorite song, which I've done now 3 Sundays in a row. But
I do understand the significance.
It's like, boys, somebody here's got a serious vendetta against this. Okay. No, that's what we have here is basically Deuteronomy asks the question, where are these favors? You did all these favors for these pagan gods to help you. So have they helped you? Did it work? No. They haven't helped you. Let them be your hiding place. Well, it's not really going to work. Because why? Verse 39, Yahweh is the only true God. This is a statement made here that's been kind of made throughout Deuteronomy, that he is one, and there is no other besides him. Hear Israel, Yahweh is our God. Yahweh is one, Deuteronomy 6:4. And you shall love Yahweh your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. And you have this statement quoted throughout the Scripture. Isaiah quotes it probably more than anybody else. Now know thou that I am he, and there is no other besides me. And because there is no other besides him, because no one is more powerful than he is, who can deliver from his hand? Well, nobody. There's none who can deliver out of my hand. It is I who put to death and give life. God is the sole arbiter of who lives and who dies. This is at some point maybe in the future I'm going to do a lesson or two on why does God kill so many people in the Bible. Because there's this question out there that people pose all the time. Well, what kind of a God does this? Well, really you're asking the wrong question altogether. Because you think about it, God is, every death that takes place, God has some hand in that, because God is the one that condemned all humanity to death in Genesis 3. And God has that right. Because he is the one that gives us life in the first place, he is also the one who has the sole authority to take it away. Gail.
God,
Yes, very good. What kind of a God gives life to people that don't deserve it? Do we deserve it? No.
We don't want to deserve it.
No.
Willfully sinful.
Yeah. Now that's a little bit of a tangent, but there is something to that God puts to death and he gives life, and that is his sole prerogative. And he also determines the parameters by which life can and cannot be taken as well. It's why he can say, do not murder, but he can also say that whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood must be shed, in Genesis 9 and verse 6. So there's those elements as well to keep in mind. Now in verses 40, 41, 42, God kind of lifts up His hand and says, as I live forever, what is He doing? Why is He lifting up His hand? What does that usually mean? Raise your right hand and... I didn't hear that.
Take an oath.
Taking an oath, yes. God is swearing an oath. He's swearing by Himself, as I live forever. If I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold on justice, I will render vengeance on my adversaries. So God makes an oath to render vengeance on the people that defy Him. Well, there are lots of people around that defy God. There's lots of people out there that, are getting away with stuff. So when are you going to fulfill this oath, we might ask. Well, and the point, God doesn't operate on our timetable, but there is a promise that there is a day coming when God will judge the world in righteousness and in equity. And in that day, He will render vengeance on His adversaries. You kind of have this, and you have more of this, we've had this eating and drinking language throughout the psalm, Israel eats bread and drinks the fat drinks the blood of grapes. Here, the people are trying to, feed food and drink to their pagan gods. And now in verse 42, His sword eats flesh and His arrows drink blood. It's kind of a really odd image, but there's something to that. Mark.
In Revelation, we have the picture of the souls, the righteous souls under the throne, saying, "How long, O Lord, how long before you avenge us?" Mm-hmm. And then toward the end of the book, we see them vindicated. So,
yeah,
God's going to do it in His own good time.
This is the whole story of the Bible right here. Revelation is playing out of some of the ideas we're reading here, that God will vindicate His people. He will render vengeance. He may not do it when we want Him to. He may not do it in our lifetime. We may die unjustly in some kind of situation. We may not live to see the day. It may not happen for thousands and thousands of years. But there is a promise made that God will judge the world. And that those who are righteous, those who loved Him and served Him will be vindicated. And those who rejected Him and spurned Him will be condemned and destroyed. Now, how in the world is that going to work? Well, the Bible unpacks that theme as it goes throughout the message of the Scriptures. But it gives us a degree of comfort. Oh, but why does it take so long? What is that? What is the length of time that it takes compared to the perspective of eternity, we might ask? It's like a guy who, nobody really gets away with anything. Even if they live their entire life and nobody ever finds out the terrible stuff that they did, and they go to their grave, everybody thinks they're a saint, and they really weren't. Did they get away with it? No, they didn't. Not ultimately, because God is the one who, vindicates and judges. God is the one who on the day of judgment, there's going to be nobody who, managed to slip past God or get through on a loophole or a technicality. There's going to be nobody who gets away with stuff, because they fudged the system or cheated the system or whatever, because God is the one who knows everything. He knows the minds and the hearts. And we as people can't possibly escape that idea. So there is His oath here that rendered judgment and justice. And verse 43 kind of gives a concluding doxology of basically calling people to praise. Now, most English versions do not have the line, "Let all the angels of God worship Him." The Dead Sea Scrolls have it, the Septuagint has it, but the Masoretic text, which most English Bibles are based on, doesn't have it. But we know it's there because the Hebrew author quotes it as Scripture in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 6. So there's the kind of an element there of, "Let all the angels of God worship Him, for He will avenge the blood of His servants. He will render vengeance on His adversaries. He will atone for His land and His people." This is also quoted, the "Rejoice, O nations," or "Rejoice, O Gentiles," is also quoted in Romans chapter 15 and verse 10. Again, just talking about this inclusion of the Gentiles in the people of God. And so the doxology sums up all the themes of the song. The nations, the angels, this vengeance that God's talking about, and the people of God, all called to praise Him all at once. Any comments or questions up to the end of Deuteronomy 32, verse 43? That's the song proper as it is closed. All right, moving on. Verses 44 through 52. Moses came and spoke all the words of this song in the hearing of the people. He, with Joshua, the son of Nun. When Moses had finished speaking all these words to all Israel, he said to them, "Take to your heart all the words which I am warning you today, which you shall command your sons to observe carefully, even all the words of this law. For it is not an idle word for you. Indeed, it is your life. And by this word you will prolong your days in the land, which you are about to cross the Jordan to possess. The Lord spoke to Moses that very same day, saying, Go up to this mountain of the Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, and look at the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the sons of Israel for a possession. Then die on the mountain where you ascend, and be gathered to your people, as Aaron your brother died on Mount Hor, and was gathered to his people. Because you broke faith with me in the midst of the sons of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the sons of Israel. For you shall see the land at a distance, but you shall not go there into the land which I am giving the sons of Israel. All right, so very end of the song, what is the main principle that we learn about God's Word here? Don't break it. Why? What is this word? It's just ink on a page? Is it just an engraving in stone? What is it?
In verse 51, "What faith with me in the midst of God is holy. We're told to be holy.
Yeah, there's.
Peter.
That's right. And Moses is. Moses did not treat God as holy, and so there's that condemnation. Mark, you have something.
Verse 47, I think, is the direct answer to your question.
Yes, thank you. You found it.
It's not an idle word for you. Indeed, it is your life.
Right.
So this is, I mean, at the end of Ecclesiastes, what do we read? For this is the whole of man. Not the word duty, which is in the King James, was inserted by the translators. Leave that word out. It's the whole of man.
The word is not an idle word. The word is life itself. And you're talking about a God that has the power to give life and to take life, and He has given us life through His Word. Now, Moses commands these people take their words to heart, but it adds an interesting dimension to what Jesus says, or what is said about Jesus. That my words are spirit and life in John chapter 6 and verse 63. In John 6 and verse 68, Peter says, Jesus, all the people are leaving, and Peter and the 12 are the only ones left. And Jesus says, are you going to leave also? And what does Peter say? Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. Jesus is the one who, Jesus' words are on par with the level of Scripture. There's that level of, which would have been a big deal to them because, they were still trying to figure out who Jesus was at that point. And they come to that conclusion. We have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. And you have the words of life. So there's something cool about that. Now the latter part of that section we just read in verses 48 to 52 kind of repeats information from the book of Numbers in Numbers 27. Moses is told to go die on the mountain, and the reason even though the word is life, Moses has to go die because he did not listen to the word. He did not treat God as holy. Numbers chapter 20 talks about the time Moses is at Meribah, and God tells him speak to the rock. He strikes the rock. But also in that instance, he also says that, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? There's a whole host of problems with what Moses does on that occasion. Lashing out at the people, taking credit for what God has done, and, not doing what God has said. And so the reason Moses dies is ultimately given because he did not treat God as holy. Moses has had several discussions with God throughout Deuteronomy on this point. So, yes?
We might make a point about that to today. A lot of brethren don't treat God as holy. When they pray to God, they talk to Him like He's their best friend. They don't address Him as if He is above them, but as if He's standing right next to them. They're talking to an old buddy. In their daily lives, they just treat God like He's a common thing. And we need to be very careful about that because God is high and holy. He is above us. He always is. And we need to show Him the proper respect. Now, some people have said to me, why do you tend to use King James English in your prayers? To me, okay, and this is only to me, it's a way of treating God as holy. It's not that I think you have to, but we've got to show Him respect.
Well, there's so many different soapboxes I could get on. I guess there's a thing. I mean, I don't believe that King James language is more reverential at all. I think that's
I don't either.
No,
Just
but
to me, it seems that way.
And I mean, as far as the way we approach God or the way we talk to God, yes, we ought to treat Him as holy. The Scripture affirms that. Without knowing what specific examples you're citing, I'm not going to try to offer a lot of commentary on the way.
I didn't want to offer specific.
Yeah, I know.
I just want us to think about it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm hesitant to try to pronounce judgment on people's hearts because of the way they approach God in prayer or things like that. I mean, because there is an element of paradox to this. Isaiah chapter 57 and verse 15 comes to mind, where it talks about, "Thus says the high and exalted one who lives forever, whose name is holy. I dwell in a high and holy place, and also with the contrite and lowly of spirit, in order to revive the spirit of the lowly and to revive the heart of the contrite." There's kind of a paradox here in God's character, and it's most fully manifested in Jesus Christ. But on the one hand, He's so far above us, we can't even get to Him. He's completely out of touch with who we are because He's too holy and we're too miserable and wretched by comparison. But on the other hand, God also came and dwelt among us and lived among us. And, He sympathized with our weaknesses, and there's an element of us being able to bring our problems before Him and say, well, you've gone through this, Lord. So there's a level of both transcendence and immanence is the way that the scholarly people talk about it, but it's kind of a paradox, if you will. Don, you have something.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess, on this point, I am unwilling to make a mandate about how people should pray that the Bible itself has not made. And I think that that's something we need to agree on, hands down. Is the Bible nowhere says you must use X, Y, and Z specific phrases in your prayer. The Bible nowhere talks about, the level of... this is a side discussion. It's not really relevant to the text of Deuteronomy per se. But I'm unwilling to bind where we have not bound, I guess is my thing on that. Keith?
In Leviticus 3, Moses said unto Aaron, "This is it." It's important for us to understand God knows everything. And I think that's not a God. You can't lie to Him.
Yeah,
You can't
true.
try to deceive Him about how you feel, how you behave, how you try to justify your behavior. Because He knows. And to do that is to disrespect Him. Sanctify God because He knows everything. Set Him apart. He knows everything. You can't lie.
Well put. There's no creature hidden from His sight, I guess. And although that's talking about the Word of God in context, I think it applies to prayer as well. There's no time when there are fewer times when we're forced to be more honest with ourselves when we're praying to the Lord. Because it's like, oh Lord, start talking about all the good things. Wait, I'm not such a good person after all, am I? There's something else to this idea that, God will be treated as holy, is that, you bring up Leviticus 10:3, which I think is definitely, it's a parallel idea to the way Moses acted at the rock. The only difference is Nadab and Abihu were just completely destroyed on the spot. Moses gets a little time to think about it. He gets to go up on the mountain and see the promised land. But the statement God makes here, that by those who come near me, I will be treated as holy, and before all the people, I will be honored. Is that optional? What if you decide you're not going to honor God? What if you decide I'm not going to be, holy before Him? What happens?
Vengeance is mine.
You will honor Him anyway. Did Nadab and Abihu glorify God? Well, yes, they did when He, incinerated them, essentially. Can that be us? Something to think about. He's glorified no matter what. Either you will glorify Him willingly, or He will glorify Himself in judgment. You will glorify Him not by choice, which is kind of a scary thought to think about. The question is, do we want to choose life, or do we want to choose death? There is no question that God will be glorified, that every knee will bow, that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. The question we have is not, and that's not an issue of choice, to kind of tie into all the stuff we've been talking about. The choice is whether we will choose life or choose death, choose the blessing or the curse. So just do what Deuteronomy says. Choose life that you may live. That's the... that's not just the choice of Deuteronomy. That's the choice the whole Bible offers you. You really only make... we talk about free will and God's sovereignty. You really only make one fundamental choice in life. You can choose to serve God, or you can choose to not serve God. You can choose life, or you can choose death. Which will it be? I had hoped to get a little further than we've gotten, and it's weird to start Deuteronomy 33. I guess we'll just read it with the time we have left. Deuteronomy 33 is Moses blessing the people, and it looks an awful lot like what other passage in the Scripture? He goes through, he blesses the 12 tribes of Israel. What does this remind us of? Yeah, Genesis 49. When Jacob sits his sons down and he gives a blessing to each one of them, a poetic blessing really. Deuteronomy ends almost the same way as Genesis. Moses, only instead of Jacob, it's Moses giving the blessings, which says in some ways Moses is the last of the patriarchs. He's the last of the fathers, so to speak. He's also a prophet, which we kind of see, bridging the gap here. And we're going to see in chapter 34 his death account and how there hasn't been a prophet like him ever since. But let's read this. Chapter 33 is a single poem addressed to the 12 tribes. There's a beginning and an end. And actually, it's not to the 12 tribes. There's a tribe missing. See if you can spot it. Now this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the sons of Israel before his death. He said, "The Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came from the midst of 10,000 holy ones. At His right hand there was flashing lightning for them. Indeed, He loves the people. All your holy ones are in your hand. They followed in your steps. Everyone receives of your words. Moses charged us with a law, a possession for the assembly of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun. And the heads of the people were gathered, the tribes of Israel together. May Reuben live and not die, nor his men be few." And this regarding Judah. So he said, "Hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. With his hands he contended for them, and may you be a help against his adversaries." Of Levi he said, "Let your Thummim and your Urim belong to your godly man, whom you proved at Massah, with whom you contended at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and his mother, I did not consider them. And he did not acknowledge his brothers, nor did he regard his own sons. But they observed your word and kept your covenant. They shall teach your ordinances to Jacob and your law to Israel. They shall put incense before you and whole burnt offerings on your altar. O Lord, bless his substance and accept the work of his hands. Shatter the loins of those who rise up against him and those who hate him, so that they will not rise again. Of Benjamin, he said, may the beloved of the Lord dwell in security by him, who shields him all the day, and he dwells between his shoulders. Of Joseph, he said, blessed of the Lord be his land, with the choice things of heaven, with the dew, and from the deep lying beneath, and with the choice yield of the sun, and with the choice produce of the months, and with the best things of the ancient mountains, and with the choice things of the everlasting hills, and with the choice things of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwelt in the bush. Let it come to the head of Jacob, and to the crown of the head of the one distinguished among his brothers. As the firstborn of his ox, majesty is his, and his horns are the horns of the wild ox. With them he will push the peoples all at once to the ends of the earth. And those are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and those are the thousands of Manasseh. Of Zebulun he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going forth, with Issachar in your tents. They will call peoples to the mountain. They will offer righteous sacrifices, for they will draw out the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand. Of Gad he said, blessed is the one who enlarges Gad. He lies down as a lion, tears the arm, also the crown of the head. Then he provided the first part for himself. For there the ruler's portion was reserved, and he came with the leaders of the people. He executed the justice of the Lord and his ordinances with Israel. Of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp that leaps forth from Bashan. Of Naphtali he said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full of the blessing of the Lord, take possession of the sea and the south. Of Asher he said, more blessed than sons is Asher. May he be favored by his brothers. May he dip his foot in oil. Your locks will be iron and bronze, and according to your days, so will your leisurely walk be. There is none like the God of Jeshurun, who rides the heavens to your help, and through the skies in his majesty. The eternal God is a dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He drove out the enemy from before you, and said, destroy. So Israel dwells in security. The fountain of Jacob secluded. In a land of grain and new wine, his heavens also drop down dew. Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord. Who is the shield of your help, and the sword of your majesty? So your enemies will cringe before you, and you will tread upon their high places. Okay, we don't have much time left. Don? Simeon's missing, yes. Gail? Huh? Issachar and Zebulun are mentioned together in verses 18 and 19. Yeah. But yeah, Simeon's missing. Maybe we'll talk about why next time. Poor Simeon.